Hello and welcome everyone to a very special episode 47 of the Stop Shitting All Over Yourself podcast.
47.
47. This episode is being recorded very much later. We're actually already at episode 51, but I held this slot for me and Elaine to find time together because if you are a Star Trek fan, you know that 47 is a very sacred number in Star Trek. It shows up everywhere. So anytime you're watching a Star Trek episode and you hear or see the number 47, just pay attention because seriously, it's threaded through everything.
Oh my God, thank you for saving the number for me.
Yeah, I did. I was like, I will not put any other. This is the 47th episode is me and Elaine talking about Star Trek in our lives.
That is so sweet.
Well, because here's what's funny. When I first met you, you were really into Star Trek. Like that was your brand. Your branding was Star Trek Elaine. You've been on cruises. Like that's just your whole thing. So tell me a little bit, because I only just recently got into it. But before we talk about me, I want to know, like, how long have you been a Star Trek fan?
Well, it's really my entire life, because it was one of those things where, I grew up in the 70s. And so my dad would come home from work and we would sit down to dinner, and it was, right around 5 o'clock, CBS or one of the affiliates or whatever. There's only like 3 channels back then, but they were airing the replays of original series, because I was only a few years old at that point. So that's all we had. So they're airing replays of original series, and we are watching this during dinner, and this is it becomes kind of our thing. And so I think my dad more so than my mom, my dad was much more into it. My dad was an engineer. He was a flight instructor. He was an aerospace engineer. He reminded me a lot of Mr. Spock. And it was just funny because my dad was not a terribly emotional person. So I really did relate to these characters because I saw, my dad and Mr. Spock, super logical and really intelligent and the person you can always depend on and rely on. So that's kind of how I grew up. And just he and I started going to conventions in the 80s. And because it was a thing. They'd come into town. We lived in South Florida. We'd go to Miami, Hollywood, whatever, and go to a Star Trek convention, meet some of the original series characters. And then even when Next Generation came out, we were still going to conventions. And I remember being like a little bit reluctant to accept Next Generation because
I know how that is.
These are not the original people.
They're not real. What are you doing?
And I remember there was so much dissension. There are articles in the TV Guide and stuff like, is this real Star Trek? Because it's just so funny because people now, the fans now that are younger, and they're like, oh, I don't know, I don't like this new Trek. And it just makes me laugh because we went through this in 1986 and you know how that turned out. So it just was a big connection for me and my dad. And I think it was one of the few ways that we really did connect because we did not have a lot in common, because I'm a therapist and I'm really touchy-feely, and he just did not understand that at all. Talking about emotions, just don't do that.
No, don't do that. No.
So that is really how I got my start, and it really helped me through a lot of the difficulties, growing up. My parents divorced when I was 12. My mom remarried. Have a great stepfather, but I was made fun of a lot in school. I was like this skinny little kid and I had the braces and the glasses and I was just pushed around a lot, literally. And so it wasn't a great time for me. And yet I really clung to Star Trek because I knew that even though I felt weird and I felt different, but I knew that, Gene Roddenberry, the creator, I knew that his vision was that there is a future place and time when people will accept you even if you are different. And just because you are different doesn't mean that you're ugly. And just because you have a different idea doesn't mean that you're wrong. And so I really clung to that because that really kind of saved my life a lot of times through my teen years. So Star Trek is very important to me. It's not just, a TV show. And those of us that are real fans know that it's like a vision.
Oh my God, you just made, I'm serious. I'm seriously tearing up with what you just did. You're an asshole for making me cry.
But it's so true. And I really feel like, because I was the person that used to sit in the library during the lunch period or whatever, because I didn't have anybody else to hang out with at certain times. And I was that lonely kid, so one day I was going into the library and I was looking for stuff on Gene Roddenberry and I found an autobiography in the library and it had that quote in there that I just said. And so I was like, wow. And I wrote it down and I just kind of lived by it. And so every time there's a new Trek show, of course, I'm really, really excited. So glad to see it continuing. I'm so glad to be a small part of it with my family name.
We're gonna come to that. We're gonna come to that. We are not going like, because there's some Star Trek fans who are gonna be like, wait a minute, what? You know what? Let's just talk about that now. Okay, so let's back up a little bit. So then I met Elaine. I actually was her coach, and this was years ago. Years ago when I first met her, because like now we've been friends for so long. It's funny to think we started that way. And you were obsessed with Star Trek, and I was kind of like, yeah, whatever. And
was Alex watching it more?
Alex has been obsessed with Star Trek. So he was always obsessed with Star Trek. I was always more Star Wars, because like I came from the generation, you remember, where you had to pick a side. You know, you had to be like either you're Star Trek or Star Wars, and if you're one, never the twain shall meet. Like, it was so stupid.
It is. Well, a lot of people still feel that way today, but
why can't we love everything? I can love both things. But so when the pandemic happened, oh God, I have to tell you how this played out. Okay, so we had just finished watching some show, and I really needed a break from watching TV because I can't remember what I was doing in my business at the time, but I just really needed to focus on it. And I just couldn't be distracted with another show. And at this point, I had seen all the TNG episodes from like when I was younger, and I'd seen the original series, but like that was about it. So he decides he's going to watch Voyager. And so he starts watching Voyager, and I'm like, I'm not getting sucked into this. I'm not getting sucked. I literally got off the sofa where I usually work, because he was sitting there watching it. I got off, went to the desk away from the television, and he's watching the episode. And then within like over the course of an hour, I started walking back over. Now I'm sitting on the sofa. My computer is over here. 15 days later, I have literally marathoned my way through Voyager, and I never stopped watching Star Trek after that. Like right now, I am currently on a watch through of Enterprise. I'm watching it through again for like the 10th time. So I got into it. But you used Star Trek as a way to grow your business. So like you actually like used it as a pillar there. Tell me a little bit about that. What made you be like, you know what? Trek is my thing. I'm going to do this. Well,
Manessa said you got to have pillars, and you got like, maybe you pick 5 pillars or whatever. And this was becoming a thing, like in all kinds of trainings and stuff. And everyone was talking about the pillars of social media. So I looked at my life and I said, that Star Trek has always been just right there at the forefront of my existence, and maybe responsible for my continued existence. And then of course the color purple, not the movie, but the color.
I love that movie. That's a really good movie.
I travel and family time and cooking. So I picked some pillars, but yeah, Star Trek was going to be one of them. So I had like my website for my shopping website for the clothing was toboldlyrow.com. And it was like, so I grabbed that one because I was like, wait a minute, this is really
cool. What is available?
And so many of it just turned out, maybe coincidentally, I don't know, but so many of my shopping group were also Star Trek fans of one sort or another, because some of them they really went back to original series, and they were like, I love Kirk and Spock, and they were like a little bit older maybe, and they were like, those are my guys, and we could talk about it, and we could say, hey, this pattern looks like Star Trek, and and they understood. And even if they didn't understand, but everyone knows who Captain Kirk is. Like everybody knows. It's in 99 Red Balloons, the song. Like, I mean, just everybody knows who Captain Kirk is. So
I you have to live under a rock if you don't know who Captain Kirk is. Like, I literally grew up in Pakistan, and I knew people from villages who knew who Captain Kirk was. So it's like, I don't know where you have to live in the world to not know who Kirk is, or Spock, or this.
Yeah.
Oh, did you watch the episode already of Prodigy, Live Long and Proper?
No, I am like behind on Prodigy.
You need to watch it. This is the best season, dude. It's so good.
I know. I've seen some of them, but I'm behind on it. But because I'm like, well, I got to watch this and then this. There's so much of it now, which is new for Star Trek fans, because we never had this many things going on at one time. So it's a little overwhelming. Because I'm also, Marina's got me into American Horror Story and some of these other things. So I just have so much.
There's so much to watch. See, it's easy in my house because I just choose what we watch, and it's just Star Trek. Like, so if you're asking, what are you watching right now? The question really needs to be, which Star Trek are you watching right now?
What's your favorite? Would you say? Do you have a favorite?
It changes. I think my absolute favorite, we were just talking about this the other day, because like it does tend to change. I think Deep Space Nine is actually my number 1 right now. I think Deep Space Nine it used to be very low down, but Enterprise is moving up a little bit, like on the thing. I tend to like the 90s Trek better because of how many episodes there are. Like, you can actually go through like 60, like there's like 100 episodes, 200 episodes. Like, you can just go through a lot of it. Like, I feel like what we have now is like, they're longer, they're more they're just more intense,
Yeah.
I feel like.
They are more intense.
But speaking of new Star Treks, so Elaine and I working together for a little bit, and then something interesting happened. There was the big Discovery came on, and Discovery was like huge, and it like was a resurgence. It's what started this new era of Trek. And there was a species, one of my favorite species, was Saru, and he is Kelpian. And so no. And then I'm looking at Elaine's name, Elaine Kelpian Federico, and I'm like, no, what the fuck is that? So now I'm like, wait a minute, Elaine, those two things are very similar. Would you care to share with us what the hell why is Saru's name, species, in your name?
Well, and a lot of people that a lot of people on Facebook or a lot of people on any social media, they'll take like, if they're fans of something, they'll take a fandom name and they'll be like, they'll incorporate that into their,
yeah. Like I might be like Manessa Spock Konecki or something like that. Yeah, exactly.
And so a lot of people do it. So it happens all the time. So a lot of people don't even think twice about it. And so like, I guarantee you, my Facebook name has been that for.
I did know, but I didn't put those things together.
Whenever we got on Facebook initially. So it's my maiden name. So but when it was announced that Discovery was coming out, one of my high school friends messaged me and said, Aaron Harberts that we went to school with is one of the producers of Discovery. And they've named this species Kelpian. And my friend Jared goes, I can only think that has to be for you. He's like, it's really weird. It's not. And I'm still sitting there like, oh, that's cool.
Sure.
I mean, he knew me. So yeah, but I hadn't heard, from him. So it was after Jared said that, I'm like, okay, well, I hope so. That's really neat. And then like a few days after he said that, I get this message, and this was right before it came out, because this was 2017. So this is like fall of 2017. And I'm sitting at work, and Aaron PMs me on Facebook, and I can read this because it's pretty cool. And just out of the blue, and he goes, "Hi, Elaine. It has been more than 20 years since we've seen each other, but for some reason, your love of Star Trek was always etched into my brain. So much so that one of our characters is named after you. His name is Commander Saru, and he is a Kelpian, a new species in the Star Trek universe. He is heroic, fun, and we hope soon to be a fan favorite. The show airs on September 24th, which is incidentally my son's birthday, which is kind of cool. And I just wanted to send you something for opening my eyes. I bet you didn't know you did that, to the magic of Star Trek. If you don't mind sending me your address, I will put it in the mail immediately." And then he gave me his email address, and I was like, wow. And he sent me one of the baseball caps that only the cast and crew in production get of Discovery. Yeah, so I have that.
I'm really emotional today. Like it
was really cool.
That's what Star Trek is all about. It's like, it's community, it's impact, it's think about this. You didn't even know that you had that impact on him so many years ago.
Right.
And
because he said we went out and had dinner with him and his husband in LA, like the next summer. And he was sitting there at the table. He's like, but I remember that you dressed up in high school. You would come to school in a Starfleet uniform. And I was like, oh my God, because I didn't even remember that. And I'm like,
that's amazing.
Oh my God. I'm thinking I'm such a dork.
In a 1980s Starfleet uniform, like that, like nowadays.
I think it was Counselor Troy. I'm pretty sure I would have cosplayed her. And we didn't even call it cosplay. It was just me dressing up as
right. I think it's before they started calling it cosplay.
Nobody liked me anyway, so I'm like, who cares?
Who cares?
Like what I do. You're not going to sit with me at lunch either way, so I may as well dress up. So, but look, and then you see that, and you see, I one time got knocked down on the playground or on the blacktop. It hurt because it was blacktop. It was asphalt.
Oh.
And my glasses went flying off my head, and I was really embarrassed. And this one kid standing there, and he's like, Elaine Kelpian, what kind of a name is that? That sounds like a disease. And so I've lived with that like my whole life. But see, this is funny though. This is really funny because now Doug Jones, and it's not just anybody, it's Doug Jones.
I know he's amazing. He's just so incredible. Cool.
And he's a love bug. He's so amazing. And who else but to play the Kelpian? And it's really neat because this name now is in Star Trek history, canon forever. And so I have the last laugh I
I was
definitely
gonna
get
say, what
that.
is that kid's name? Who knows? Doesn't matter.
Who knows? Because he doesn't have a character named
Like
after himself.
exactly, he doesn't have a character named after him. But that really touches upon something really important, which I think, I started watching Star Trek right at the beginning of COVID. And so it became like my COVID show. But even more, it's way more than that now, in that like I feel like it gives a place for people to go who feel like they don't have anywhere else. It's like a community. Like these people, these characters, they are real. They're real in our lives. They're real in terms of their influence. Like essentially when we're like, I'm going to go metaphysical here, but what the hell is real, right? Real is like if they have an impact on your life and you're and they're important to you and they help you through things, then they're real to you. And and as a result, I started to like, so okay, so let's talk about why I wanted to do this podcast. So this podcast is called Life Lessons from Star Trek. And the reason why I wanted to do this is because if you watch Star Trek, which I know you do, but for anyone who's listening, the Ferengi have a rules of acquisition, which is their rules that govern how they do business with people. They're a very, very business-like race. All they care about is money and profit. Profit is a really, really big thing. And they have this rules that govern the way they do things. And it was such an interesting idea.
And there's like 200 something of them.
285 actually.
Yeah.
And
okay. A lot.
It was, well, in Enterprise, it was only 187. At the time, I just watched these episodes, so I've got that tattooed in my brain. But it really made me think about if there was this episode where he was explaining that to someone else, and the person he was explaining it to said, it's very comforting to work with someone who has thought so hard about this, that they have rules that govern them so that you know what to expect in any transaction. And I thought to myself, that's how I feel about branding. I feel like, all branding is, all business is really just deciding how are you doing business? What do you stand for? What is your framework? That kind of thing. And then you operate within those rails. You decide what your rails for life are going to be, what your fence for life is going to be. But it's helpful to know what those are, like practically speaking, written down, rather than like just not knowing them and having to make every decision as it comes. Like, oh, what do I believe now? What do I believe now? What do I believe now? So like having that written down, knowing this is my code for life. And I think a lot of people get that from religion and spirituality. Like they have like your religious codes, right? But I don't have a religion. Like I don't follow a particular religion. There's no code telling me, don't lie, except my code, right? That tells me that. So for me, one of the big things that I learned in Star Trek was about having a code for how you live your life. And following that. And so I was like, there's only one person I know who has enough Star Trek knowledge to be able to who would be able to like pull this information literally out of their asses. And that would be you, Elaine.
Well, thank you.
So I'm curious, when you think back, because we talked a little bit about how Star Trek, built a community for you, right, during a time and created a connection between you and your father. But when you think back because you even said it's kept you alive. And so you've clearly also brought a great many things from Star Trek into your life as an adult, as a child, as a teenager. I'm curious, share I would love to hear like your favorite or one that like, you're like, this is going to be the most impactful for anyone.
Well, I think it's really interesting because a lot of times I go back to, like yourself, I don't adhere to any specific religious philosophy. And, I found out fairly late in life that I have Jewish descent and, but I didn't grow up going to church. So I had parents that celebrated, we have a Christmas tree back here. We light a menorah every year. We celebrate as many different things as we can because I love different cultural traditions. So we like to celebrate as many as possible. But it's sometimes difficult when you're navigating this planet because a lot of people will ask you, one of the first questions they may ask you when they meet you, depending regionally where you live, is where do you go to church or what is your religious background? It's just like, kind of after, well, what do you do for a living? And they try to find out things about you. And it's like, well, if you say, well, I'm Catholic or I'm Protestant or I'm Jewish or Muslim or whatever the answer is, and then they kind of know, and whether or not they want to admit it, they're going to pigeonhole you, but they say, well, I know this about you now, so I'm going to now frame you like this. Mm-hmm. But for me, since I don't subscribe to a belief that is widely held by millions and millions of people, but I remember an episode of Next Generation with Data where he was worried because as an android and as being unique, there's only one of him. And so therefore he was trying to examine various cultures. Why does this culture do this practice? Why does this culture have this habit? And how can I possibly have a culture? Because there is no other android. There is no other me. So I don't have a background that I can draw from for holidays and for other things. And Captain Picard is so wise. And he tells him, Data, you are a culture of one, which is no less significant than a culture of 1 million. And so it's very true, because you can really sit there sometimes and beat yourself up over the fact that you are unique. And so maybe you do things differently than everybody else on the planet, but it doesn't make it invalid. So I've had to remind myself that a lot, because you can feel kind of lonely, especially depending where you live regionally. If you live in a place where, like I'm in the South, I'm in the Southeast. So church is big here. So there's a lot of times on Sunday when, I feel like a zombie crawling around. I'm not in a church. I'm going to Starbucks with the other zombies and I'm getting my coffee, but I don't really, there's not that sense of belonging, So, but then again, I have a larger belonging because the Star Trek family is always a place to belong. So.
Absolutely. It's true. You said where you live is important, because you were talking about they'll ask you where you go to church. And I thought to myself, nobody ever asked me that here, but I'm in Massachusetts, right? So nobody's really going to ask you that in Massachusetts. So it really does depend on where you're at. But I think it's also like when you think about, the things that make us feel weird, like you were talking about things that made you feel weird when you were young. And truthfully, like my life when I was, I had trouble making friends. Like I had friends groups and then I didn't. And then I was lonely. And I remember the times where I was ostracized. But like the things that made me feel different is, I have ADHD and nobody knew what that was then. And so I was always stupider than everyone else, right? I never was, I never got good grades. I was always the failure on that. I was the weird white kid, in a sea of Pakistanis. And then I came to the States and I'm the weird brown kid in a sea of white people, and it's sort of like nowhere, like it's where there's so many reasons why people may not fit in, and I think that especially during that time period where we're moving into a more accepted space now, but I think Star Trek really, in terms of inclusion, but I think Star Trek created a space for people to feel included regardless of why they felt kind of weird, or if there was, whatever it was that was going on with them.
There was a lot of that, because if you really look at some of the journeys, and when I work as a counselor with my clients, I use the hero's journey a lot to work through issues, problems in people's lives. So, but there are so many great examples of this all through Star Trek. You can just pick your favorite character. The hero's journey will follow someone from the decision to take action against something that's been bothering them, usually contains a friend or comrade to help. And then it will go through some difficulties. And then there'll be one major difficulty right before the end where they plunge into a chasm. You don't know if they're going to survive. And then all of a sudden they come back out of the chasm, they triumph, and that's the end of the story. And so there's a million examples of this, because Finding Nemo is actually a really, really excellent.
Oh, so good. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Perfect, because, Marlin, he has a problem because he's got to find his son, and Dory is the helper, and they go through trial after trial. And then when they're in the belly of the whale, it is the deep chasm. And just then Dory gives him this, you have to trust me. You just have to let go. And then he makes that decision. It changes his life. They shoot out of the whale, and then he is able to complete the journey. So a lot of times I ask people, do you have a hero? Do you have like some people, Captain Marvel, if you're into Marvel, the superheroes, if you look at every one of those movies, they're all heroes' journeys as well. But if you take someone like Kira, because we love Kira Nerys from Deep Space Nine, and you can take a look, and she has she questions a lot of her identity. Who am I? Because I was a resistance fighter, but now I'm working with the Federation. Does that make me a collaborator? And, if I'm helping Gul Dukat at some point to defeat the Maquis, what does that mean for me? I mean, because she's got a religious guidepost, but it doesn't answer every single question, And
sometimes her religious guidepost has people who are giving her bad advice. So she has to go inwards to herself to find what she's looking for.
Yeah, because she cannot trust Kai Wynn, and she knows it. And she lost Kai Opaka, which was like her number one. And so she also is disappointed. And this has happened to a lot of people. Look at the Catholic Church, because they find out that up in the higher echelons, and there's been abuse and all kinds of allegations with the priests. And so sometimes people, they kind of feel like they're floating lost on the ocean with no life raft, because, well, what happened to my belief that my faith would always get me through things? Now I see these people that are supposed to represent my faith, and they've got feet of clay. And, so I think in Star Trek that you can attach yourself to a character that has a lot of questioning going on and kind of follow their story and be like, what would Kira do?
Their strength. Exactly. Oh my God. Because, I did go through my own sort of Kira's journey with the religion and the faith. And actually there was because I don't have a religion, like I said, of my own, but I do have faith. Right. And there's this scene where her and Odo are talking, and she's trying to explain something to
I
him.
know
that seems
exactly what you're going to
contradictory.
say.
I know you do. And she says, and he goes, explain it to me. And she goes, that's the thing about faith. If you don't have it, then you won't understand. And if you do have it, then there's no need to explain.
No need to explain. Yeah.
That's one of my favorite scenes.
Perfect.
I love it. It's so good. And you're so right. Like you can at different stages in life attach yourself to different characters. And the truth is like, and I think you mentioned something important, that you do this in your coaching practice too. Your consulting practice. Fuck's sake, your psychology practice. Jesus, as a counselor.
Counselor Troy.
Counselor Troy, is that it doesn't have to be Star Trek, right? So like we're talking about this because we're latching onto these characters and these people because they're our favorites, and we've watched the show forever. But like if you're somebody who's like, yeah, no, I'm more into like the X-Men or more into something else, like you're not going to get this, like obviously Star Trek is a different story altogether, but in terms of just heroes' journeys or attaching yourself to somebody who's outside of yourself for strength, like that's, I feel like a lot of people feel like that's maybe childish or silly or whatever, but I think that's how we get through life. Like,
yeah. Why are these movies so popular? Why does Marvel continue to bring fans year after year after year? I think it's because Stan Lee knew something, which is the fact that heroes are also imperfect, just like humans. And it doesn't matter if they have superhuman strength or if they've been given some kind of tesseract power or whatever, because they make mistakes and they have foibles. And, so that's why I love Tony Stark, Iron Man. I think that you have somebody there who he knows he's imperfect. He's got a drinking problem. He's got all kinds
of problems. A lot of problems.
And he's on this journey. He's on a hero's journey.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to give out spoilers. Everyone probably knows. Well,
I mean, at this point we're far enough, but
they know what happened.
Dumbledore is like, FYI, he killed Dumbledore.
But I think because he's so real. Yeah. He's just such a real person. He's not perfect. So you can say, hey, you can do great things and also be an idiot sometimes. And you can make huge mistakes, but you can learn from them and you can try to be better, because the striving is always to be better. Yeah. I mean, even Loki, he was kind of striving to be better.
And he was hot.
He was chaotic as hell, but he was striving to be better. And yeah, I love Loki.
Well, and that's why I really kind of like Picard, Pike, and even Kirk to some extent, though I don't think they had fleshed it out as much when Kirk was there. But I definitely think they fleshed it out in the movies with Kirk, but definitely with Picard, and that they strive, the kind of advice that they always give, they're always striving to do good, be good, to give you that sort of moral compass that you're looking for.
Yeah. And yet they do fall short sometimes, but that's where all the learning comes in, and they're willing to do the self-examination that's necessary, and they'll do it on screen, which is great. It's great for all of us
because we get to watch it. Yeah. Okay. So speaking of, so we're going to go into my next favorite thing now. Favorite lesson ever on Star Trek was Darmok and Jalad on the ocean. So here's why I love that episode. I've watched it 4,000 times. If you're only going to watch a single episode of Star Trek, I recommend watching Darmok and Jalad. That's what we started with, and I fell in love with it.
Really?
It's so Alex did
that was your gateway episode.
So what happened was Alex said he wanted to watch the top 10 Star Trek TNG episodes before I'd watched any of them. So this was actually, I can't remember, this was before or after Voyager.
I think we were talking about this because you said, what would your list be? And you said,
exactly. And so he made a list of the top 10, and the Darmok was number 1, and like at the bottom. So it was the last one we watched. Wow. And it's one of my favorites. And the reason why is because it's two people who cannot speak to each other. They just cannot communicate. They don't speak the same language. They're from completely different planets. They've never seen each other before. And they're trying so hard. They both want to communicate. And there's misunderstandings and there's challenges. And one guy is doing the work to try to help Picard understand. Like, he's trying really hard. And Picard is like, I understand. I don't know. He's only taking it in with his own culture, with his own understanding. And so the beginning of the episode, it's like really frustrating because he's not understanding. But here's what happened. In the middle of the episode, at one moment at the end, when they're being attacked by a creature, Picard's like, arms wide, right? So arms, fist, attack, bring it close. And as the guy sees Picard's like understanding happen, I'm getting chills just thinking about this. As he sees Picard's understanding happen, you can see he's like, Sokov, his eyes uncovered, right? And he has so much excitement and joy at the realization that they've made this breakthrough. And it made me realize that we work so hard for these brief moments of breakthrough, right? in our lives. Like we'll work for weeks and months to get a breakthrough. And the second we're done, what's next? And we don't take the time to stop. Like that is such a powerful moment, and you want to sit and bask in it, like the moment of a glimmer of understanding.
Yeah.
Like we don't realize how powerful understanding can be, right? And I feel like that episode really talks about it's worth it to put the effort in, because when understanding comes, it's like an orgasm. Like it's amazing. You're gonna feel great, and then you're gonna eat a cigarette afterwards.
And I think in the beginning of that episode, the way you're describing Picard, like he's not, because you were saying that he is trying to receive what the Temerian captain is saying in his own, from his own cultural background, in his own way of speaking. And there's a little bit of arrogance there because you're traveling through a galaxy, and you must not assume that everybody puts sentences and things together the same way that we do. And you get a little touch of this in the Deep Space Nine episode with the Skreans, because the universal translator can't figure out their language at first either. And so it's kind of like we walk around thinking, and this is why I love travel. This kind of segues into one of my pillars, which is travel.
We'll get through all your pillars today.
I know. Let's talk about cooking. You coming from a different cultural viewpoint as well, and have seen this firsthand. But when you travel, it really breaks down a lot of barriers, because so many of us, how many Americans do you know that have lived in the same, even in the same like small town or the same geographical area their entire lives, and they don't experience life outside of that, much less go across the ocean and go to Europe or go to Japan or go somewhere like that and see how differently people live? It's really eye-opening. And that's why I've always been a huge proponent of, gosh, any extra pennies you have left over, gotta travel. You just got to get out of here and see the world differently. Not everybody lives the way we do. Not everybody thinks the way we do. And it's, I just think it's eye-opening. So,
I think that's such a key element, in general, like the arrogance. I feel like that's really important, because and I like that we're using Picard as an example, because he's beloved, universally beloved. Yeah. We love him. He's amazing. I mean, I love, oh my God, why can't I, not Jean-Luc Picard. Patrick Stewart. I was like, I could only think of his real name, which is Picard. But he's a captain of a starship. He's been traveling all this time. He's seen all these cultures, and he still thinks this is the way it is. Right. And I feel like that also made me challenge myself in that things aren't, if you go elsewhere, you're able to see that things aren't necessarily the way you think they are, or there's other ways of thinking. But when you shift your way of thinking because you've been exposed to this, it opens up so many doors when you come home. Because now you're taking these new insights, new ideas, new thoughts, and you're bringing them to this space that makes this whole space new and full of opportunity. But you don't get that if you stay in your own box. But for many of us, we tend to think, well, I know what I'm doing. I'm where I'm at. And it is arrogant to think that, well, I figured it out, so here I am. I don't need to have my perspective changed. And the truth is like, we all need to have our perspective changed at some point in time.
Yeah, it's like, just because we do it this way in Georgia or this way in California or this way in Florida doesn't mean that over in London or Paris, they're doing things the same way. So it's really eye-opening if you can, have the opportunity to get out. And I guess, Star Trek tries to do this in a virtual context because we can't go to Mars right now or Romulus or any of these other places, but Star Trek tries to bring that mentality to us. It's like, hey, look at these other cultures. They're not wrong. They're not stupid. They're not scary. They're just different. And maybe their way is possibly it's even better. So, that's the lesson there.
Absolutely. Okay. So I told you my second one. What's your second one now? What is your other? Because I feel like I thought we'd be able to get through a whole bunch, but you and I thought this is so robust and so great. This might be one of the best episodes I've ever done. So I'm super excited. But tell me another area, because I'm always curious to hear tell me another lesson you brought from Star Trek.
Well, I think it's really funny. There's a lot, and like when you ask that, a lot of things come to mind at once. So I'm kind of like, oh my God,
it's hard to pull out the one that you're going to be able to share. The last one, the most important one, no pressure.
The most important one. Oh my gosh.
No, I'm kidding. It doesn't need to be anyone. I'm kidding.
I think the idea of family, and we learn this. I think I grew up really, really being grateful for friendships, because just what you learn from Spock and Kirk and McCoy. And because the friendship is the most important thing in all 79 episodes of that original series, their friendship is just what ties the entire thing together. It's consistent, it's stable. And I think we see that again playing through in all of the different series. And when I think about like my comrades, my family that I go and cruise with, and you've got to do a cruise, Manessa. You have to do a cruise.
Yeah, no, I told Alex that we absolutely have to do a cruise or a convention or something, because like after you sent pictures of your last cruise, I was like so fucking jealous.
There's nothing like it, because it really will. Okay, so how I'm going to just try to describe the cruise, and this is going to be my third one, but when you go on the Star Trek cruise, you are not only with like-minded fans, so there's an instantaneous connection, but it's just that the type of people that go on this cruise are the type of people who, if you see someone who's in a wheelchair struggling, as you know, all like strangers, which were not strangers by the end of the 7 days, but they run up and let me get the door for you. Let me help you. Can I get you a water? Do you need anything? And this is just so weird, because if you take an average cruise, this doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. And like we've had people lose their wallet. And then they go to guest services, like, I know it's gone, but the wallet is there with all the cash intact and everything. They're like, oh yeah, somebody turned it in. Like that is never going to happen on a cruise unless it's a Star Trek cruise. It is just the kind of loving environment where people, no one is a stranger. There's people that literally, because they feel like they're more introverted, so they say, you're going to wear a turtle pin, little turtle, and then whenever we see you, we know that you're quiet, but you might want to be drawn in. So we're going to know that. And you just sit down and we'll bring you in, or like,
oh my gosh, that is so sweet. That's such a great idea. Oh my God, I'm going to use that for my next convention.
So amazing. And people will hide little like rubber ducks all over the ship with like little Star Trek quotes on them. And if you collect them, you go to they'll say, go to room number, whatever. And there's a prize for you. And this is all the time. Garrett Wang is famous for, you know how everyone puts the and he played Ensign Kim on Voyager
for like 7 years. The poor guy never got.
He loves to cruise and he loves the fans, because when Marina and I ran into him, he's like, hey, how are you doing? How's your arm? Like that, because he's just I got bitten by I got stung by a yellow jacket. Bad thing. So anyways, my arm blew up like 50 times. And Garrett was like, oh my God, that's disgusting. But if you those little whiteboards that people put on their cabin doors, and you know how people will sign them and stuff, like Garrett Wang will go around and he'll autograph them, and then like you're taking that thing down off the door and go, oh my God, like
seal it up.
It's just so it's just such an amazing group of people, and the stars love to be there, and they mingle with the guests, because Robert O'Reilly that plays Gowron, he was the one who started the whole Qapla' group, because so I think Bob O'Reilly likes to walk a lot for some reason. He will pace up and down the deck, like on the promenade level. He'll just pace up and down. So you'll see him and you wave, and he's so friendly. He's so nice. I think he kind of had a thing for me, because I had this really cute dress on one night. And he's like, hey, I really like your dress.
You just want Gowron. Oh my God, I love his eyes. They're so
give me the eyes. So anyway, my husband thought that was hilarious, but so
I think it's amazing.
I was like, I can go for this. No, but he'll walk up and down the deck. And so there was a group of people that started hanging out at the Gregarious Gorn, and that was the pub on the promenade, and they're just hanging out drinking, and he comes walking by and they're like, Qapla', and he's like, Qapla'. And so like this happened all day and all night. So it went from Robert O'Reilly walking around to just anybody. So anybody would walk, especially if they were cosplay as a Klingon, Qapla'. Yeah. So these guys were doing this till like 2 a.m, and I had a promenade room, so I was like over them, and I'm trying to sleep, and I'm like, oh my God,
and all you're hearing is Qapla'.
All I can hear was Qapla'. But I said to Marina at one point, I said, you know what? I know that I'm kind of irritated at this sound right now, but I'll bet you anything, when this cruise is over, I'm gonna miss it.
Absolutely, and it's a great story.
This is so much fun. So I came home, and I had to get a car, because I was buying a new car because my car had been totaled a few months before. So I got this car, and the first thing I did is I went to the tag office, and I got a license plate that says Qapla'.
Oh, I know. You sent me that. That is amazing. Absolutely. I showed it to Alex. He thought it was fabulous. Oh my God, amazing.
And I put a picture on the cruise Facebook group and I said, this is for you guys. And I'm joining you next year. And I'm going to be down there with you. And we're going to be yelling. And it's just fantastic. I don't know how else to describe. I mean, it's a week of paradise. It is the way the world should be. It's terrible when you get off the ship and you realize you have to go back to reality where people are not as nice and not as loving and caring. It's just all about everyone taking care of everyone else. And I'm not even going to go into Kenneth Mitchell's rave because, oh my God, blew me away. And you care so much about these people. Kenneth Mitchell is dying of ALS. And, you know, he throws a rave every year. And last year was likely his last one. And it was really, and it became a celebration of life for him because he read a poem. And we were dancing in this rave to this poem. And I mean, like, I cannot tell you the joy that was in that room. We're literally there to love on him because he knows he's dying. And he's a young man.
I love him. He was in the recent Discovery episode, yeah?
Yeah, when he played Aurelio, yeah, and this damn horrible disease is taking him way too soon. But before that happened, he wanted to do this last rave, and so he has this amazing poem, and he put it to music, and we were all there. And I can't tell you. You would think it would be with some sadness, but all I could feel was this overwhelming joy, and that's all I can describe as this giant bubble of warm golden joy, like just surrounding us, and it can't, you know, those of us that were there, like, and all the stars were there, they were dancing with us and everyone. And he comes into the middle of the room and we all he wanted us to make a circle around him and then go like this and like with the lights. And we had
nice.
And make a kind of like an artistic creation with using our bodies to make this art. And he was so happy, just the look on his face. I mean, he was, like, I'll never, ever experience anything like that again, but what an amazing moment. And I don't know where else that could ever happen because, you know, he can come right into the center of a room filled with like 1,000 fans and not worry that anyone's going to hurt him or trample or nothing's going to happen because that's who Star Trek is. Like, we're so protective of the people that we love. So we're very respectful of all of the stars and everything. So, but just what an amazing moment to have been there. Like, just, it blew me away. It was very, very special. And just, you realize what a special community this is and that is something I think it does differ from like the Star Wars fandom in that way.
Absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't know because I've never been on a Star Wars or Trek cruise, but I don't feel that same, like the general energy that comes off of it is not the same. But I do have to ask you this question before we go into my last question for you, which is, have you been to the Riker sitting on a chair competition? Like
no.
There's a competition, right? Like, what's his face? Oh God, what's his? Jonathan Frakes. He's actually shared several videos from the people sitting down, how to get onto a Riker.
I've seen it.
It's amazing. I was gonna say, I don't think you can. Isn't that chair a little high for you?
Yes, Captain.
Oh my God, that's amazing. So
it's only. Hip replacements are the best thing ever.
Yeah, it's funny because once we all learned that it was about his back, I'm like, dude, every time he's standing uncomfortably, like standing a certain way, I'm like, I totally understand. I totally understand. Like, he's like leaning forward, his crotch is right next to Data's face, and you're like, why are you sitting? Like, every time he goes, when Data is sitting on the little thing in the front, he'll go to Data to like be like, what do you have, Mr. Data? And he'll put his leg up right next to him so that if Data turns around, he's right in his crotch. And it's like, what is happening here? It's amazing. Okay, so here's my last question for you. Is what is your current favorite Star Trek?
I just have to go with DS9 because it's been on like auto repeat for like the last 5 years or something. But I really hooked into it, and the thing is, I didn't watch it in the first run. My dad and I watched maybe just a handful of episodes, and he passed away before it was finished, so he never saw the whole thing. But I didn't really get into it until about 5 or 6 years ago, and Tom was traveling for business and he was gone a lot. So at night I'm like, well, let me just binge it. I'm just gonna get into it and binge it.
Just throw an episode, it's fine.
I just remember like getting to The Visitor with Jake Sisko and Ben Sisko with the you know what episode I'm talking about?
You have to tell me what titles. I always get thrown with
titles.
Okay. Once you tell me the story, like I'm starting to get better at it, but like, you know what, I'm just gonna Google it because I know I've seen it.
When Jake is an old man and he's been writing.
Oh yeah, that's Alex's favorite. Oh, Tony Todd plays old Jake. That's so good.
Back and forth through time. And I was sitting there and I was bawling and bawling.
I just watched that episode too, actually.
And I love DS9, but I think that episode is what congealed it for me and made me say, this is it. This is my home now, because that just pulled that emotion out of me. Oh my God. So that for me, because for a long time I was an original series person. And when I cosplay, more often than not, I'm going to cosplay something old school. I'm going to go back to those 1960s era outfits, and it's so much
You and
fun.
Jadzia.
It's so colorful, and it's so like the 60s were great, just mod, all that dressing. But so always had clung to that, kind of cut my teeth on Next Generation in terms of career because of Counselor Troy, and that was definitely an inspiration for me to go into the field of therapy. But and I like Voyager. Marina's favorite is still Voyager. She's team 7 of 9 all the way, and but I think that's a great role model for her. And Marina loves science and she loves math. But for me, just Deep Space Nine just is like home. So if I need to be comforted at the end of the day, or if it's like right before bed and I'm just going to drift off to sleep, I'm putting on Deep Space Nine. Yeah.
Marina,
even though I know I've got the Kelpian thing with Discovery, and Discovery is a great show and I love it. But DS9 is home. So
I think I agree fully. When you said Marina, by the way, I just had to go. I don't want to lose this because you said Marina is all about 7 and 9. And I thought to myself, she's Naomi Wildman. She's basically, they play kind of Scott together.
I know, it's true. And Marina is named after Marina Sirtis, by the way, in case anybody wonders. That is.
Oh, really? I didn't. You know what? It's so funny. I didn't know that. One of my friends, Christy, her son is named Riker.
That's cool.
And then my dog is named Kira. So like we're all, absolutely. I can totally. I
had a client that came in to see me for counseling. She's a Star Trek fan, and she named her daughter Esri.
That's amazing. Cool. That is absolutely amazing. All right. So first of all, thanks so much for doing this. Like, this is like so fun. I didn't give Elaine any guidance at all. I just said, hey, listen, let's come and talk about Star Trek. So she's like, yes, let's do it. So I'm so glad that you were game. If you are interested in watching any Star Trek at all, I would strongly recommend starting with Deep Space Nine. At least get yourself up to episode 19, Duet. A lot of people don't really get into Deep Space Nine until you get to episode 19, which is really when you watch it, you're like, holy fucking shit, I can't believe I know what kind of show this is. It's usually the one. So get to 19. But otherwise, you can also start with Strange New Worlds, which is one of the brand new ones that just came out. And it's really good because it's high tech. It's got the look that you expect from now stuff. Like, it's all shiny and bright, but they're doing like standalone episodes. So you don't have to have any history.
That group of actors is amazing. I saw that panel at Dragon Con, and Jess Bush, who plays Nurse Chapel, she is coming now to the cruise. They just announced her last week. So Jess Bush was just a late addition to the Star Trek cruise. So I'm thrilled because she is fun.
She's amazing. I like her a lot. So you start with Strange New Worlds, but honestly, if any part of Star Trek resonated with you today, then definitely pick it up because it's a way for you to create a whole new family for yourself, a whole new community. Like, message us at any time to tell us what you love and what you don't. Like, literally, both of us will be like, yes, okay, whatever you want to talk about Star Trek.
Talk about this all day.
I know, right? So I will put Elaine's information in the show notes, and you can contact her. She has a counseling. Elaine, tell us a little bit. I just realized. We did not talk anything about your business or anything like that. But who are you? Who are you, Elaine? No. Because this was more about you and me and Star Trek. But we're gonna get Elaine back on here where we can talk all about Elaine's business. But I would really, but I'll get you.
Let's do Star Trek again. That's fine too.
Well, yeah, we can do both. Like, I'm actually thinking, God, this is really fun. We should do this again. Like, I feel like we should definitely do it. Maybe at episode 147.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Elaine. Is there any parting message that you want to share with my listeners regarding yourself, Star Trek, anything at all?
I think, like I was saying about the hero's journey, find your hero, go back into even if it's childhood heroes you had, books you like to read, characters that you love, but whoever you resonated with that reminds you of you or something in there that you identify with, find your hero, because in tough times that can really pull you through. And it's sometimes like the what would Jesus do bracelet, but it's like, what would Captain Marvel do? Or what would, it really can be a guiding force. And there's a lot of answers in there. Writers have given us amazing templates for how to get through life. So we can avail ourselves of those. And it's comforting. I think it's comforting.
It is very comforting. Thank you so much, Elaine. You are the best.
Thank you.
Alrighty.